Hello and welcome back, and this is another part in my continuing series where we look at the DS1621 Plus and compare it against the TSH973AX from QNAP, but it's broader than that, of course. We are looking at the BTRFS file system equipped DSM platform, currently in 6.2 at the time of recording, and we're comparing it against QuTS Hero, the ZFS file system equipped software user interface and GUI from QNAP, both via a web browser. Now, a few disclaimers before going any further into this video about virtualization. Now, today we are utilizing these two systems. They're both populated with HDST 10TB drives, and I am using a quite well graphically equipped laptop to record this. I'm also using OBS, as you can see here on screen, but it is worth highlighting that right now the fans on that laptop GPU card are ramping up in the background because I'm doing a lot of graphical stuff. In fact, if we go into the task manager, we're going to be able to see that quite a lot of utilization is taking place there. And even in dormant, before we're doing anything aggressive, we're already utilizing quite a lot of the embedded GPU and GPU card and quite a lot of my system memory. So I apologize for the fan noise in the background from my laptop peaking up. Also, it's worth highlighting I am using a 4 gig model of the DS1621 Plus. This was a unit that was sent to me, and we are using a VM that's consuming 2 gig of that memory. So although memory utilization is high, we have to remain relative because this is only 4 gig in this model, and in the QNAP here we're using a 16 gig model. It arrives with 8 gig by default. Both of these units are the same price, let's be fair there though. So for 850 to 860 quid including the tax, you can get a 4 gig 1621 Plus or an 8 gig 973AX. This is already upgraded to 16 because this is the model that was sent to me by the from QNAP for all of my reviews here. I haven't got it for much longer, unfortunately, but this will show in the resource management. But what I will highlight is both of these systems have got a VM running on them, both at this utilization, and both of them are doing absolutely fine. So even though the Synology is only running on 4 gig of memory, it is doing more than enough and doing very, very well. So in today's video, what we're going to be looking at is virtualization on these systems. We're going to be looking at a VM that we're hosting, a Windows 10 VM on both of them, just to see the user interface. We're also going to be looking at the client software from both platforms. In the case of Synology, that would be Synology Virtual Machine Manager. And in the case of the QNAP, we are looking at Virtualization Station. We're going to look at their highs, lows, what they offer, what they don't, and ultimately help you guys decide which one of these client softwares is a better fit for you and your business. It's also worth highlighting that we are looking at these Windows 10 VMs via a web browser. We're accessing them remotely on the NAS, but of course this is not the best way to access these, and if you're a Windows user, I strongly recommend utilizing remote desktop connection. There are other tools out there for accessing a VM remotely via the internet or the network, but you already have one pre-designated inside your Windows machine for accessing it. All you got to do is chuck in the IP. If you have security credentials, you can pop them in there, but it allows you to remote access a VM in a far more fluid and easy way. The reason we're using a browser is, one, to show that it can be done, because some NAS tools, such as those of Acer Store and TerraMaster, although they can access via the web browser, they're nowhere near as smooth as this. So I'm utilizing the Chrome browser windows here just to show that it's possible and that it's done quite well. Now, we're using a Windows 10 VM on these. I will highlight that it's the same VM with a slight difference. On the right hand side of the screen on the QNAP, I am using one of the free VMs that you can just download, and I will go into more detail on that with regards to the marketplace later, but you can go ahead and download a free VM straight in the user interface here and then deploy it automatically, and this is that very VM that I'm using. On the Synology side of things, I am using that same VM that I've used before, but when I was running performance testing on some Synology rack mounts and using multiple VMs and then using Atto Benchmark, IOmeter and tests like that, this one is more evolved. It's had a few applications pre-installed, but you can see that this is still the same build of that VM on both of these screens. So let's look at the VMs themselves. As we can see from the user interface, both of them, if we tap the left-hand side, have their own configuration options. As one would expect from this series, Synology have kept it simple. On the side here, it's very user-friendly. Everything from activating extra keys, because of course, if you tap Control-Alt-Delete on this window, although you're accessing a VM, you would of course utilize hotkeys on your local machine. So Control-Alt-Delete will likely open up the task manager on your local machine, not here on the VM. But if you like, you can tap Control, Alt, and then tap Delete on this system, and it will activate the Control, Alt, Delete option there. So again, that's what those hotkeys there are for. On the side, of course, we can also look at full screening if we choose. And of course, at the bottom, you can change some of the scaling, the latency, and ultimately improve the performance of it. And of course, your network or internet settings, if you're accessing remotely, will be factored in here. There's lots of options that we're going to talk about in a little bit on the client software, but that's pretty much your full range of control with a browser-based VM access. Obviously, using remote desktop on Windows, you get a bunch more options of configuration, but that is the preset options. Now, on the QNAP, again, as expected, more options. Maybe too many for some that may find it a touch intimidating. Sorry, I accidentally clicked there. We've already got that open there. There's going to be a slight delay, as you can see there, as we open a lot of these windows because of accessing remotely on this busy network and using screen recording. These delays are not indicative of the software being used. If we have a look at the side options here on Virtualization Station, we have got, again, pre-made options inside that can reboot, suspend, or take snapshots that you can revert to of your VM, which is exceptionally handy. Change the display quality so you can get it real low if you choose, so you get faster response time at the expense of graphics, or change them on the fly. Full screen options, hotkey options, function keys beyond that of just those first few, as well as screenshots and changing some of the VM settings with regard to connecting USB and other devices. And this is going to be a fun area that I'm going to touch on later on. But these VMs will run absolutely fine. We can go into them and we can go through some of the options if we choose. We can open them up there on each of the screens and see things in real time. But again, these VMs, very straightforward. I think the network there is busy. Let's refresh there. And again, that's not QNAP's fault. That's my network's fault. But we can go in, nice and straightforward, look at all the options. I've already installed Windows unofficial shell here on this newer VM. So, if we want, we can go back to the old style of menu if we choose. And again, all of those options are ready and available there. You can access all of the options if you choose. And ultimately, between the two of them, it's very similar. I think it's a little brighter there on the Synology one, but this is the VM that I've done a lot of tinkering with since I first downloaded it, and I think that has to be represented. Now, if we have a look at the client software on both platforms, we can have a look at the options of configuration between these two settings. Now, it's worth highlighting that there's a slight change of UI perception between Synology and QNAP here, between DSM and QuTS Hero and Virtualization Station and Virtual Machine Manager, because Synology have actually made it a bit more complex, something I wouldn't have expected from the brand. As we see here, while the VM is running, we have a bunch of options. We can action these, clone them, make snapshots, that sort of thing, but a lot of this can't be done while the VM is running. You can't even edit a number of the settings while the VM is running. You can have a look at the settings that we've got dedicated to this VM and also change users on the fly, but most of the options can't be changed until the VM has been shut down. We've got the tabs at the bottom to give us that real-time information as well, all of the configuration there and utility and resource being consumed. And on the side, we've got all of the options for adding storage clusters for our VMs to live on, storage management as well as configuring the network or creating sub-virtual networks for our VMs to run on in conjunction with our existing VM network, upload existing images, backups or ISOs of existing VMs that you've got from third parties such as Windows Evaluation website, or if you've created VM images previously, which is what I've done on a USB share here. When we go into the VMs images here, we've got different VMs that we run here. for different videos here on the channel. And they can all be mounted here, even virtual hard disks as well, each of which you can go over and then export VMs in. Then you've got the different retention policies for snapshots and protections running in the background, and you can change a number of the default options with regards to the VM clusters, storage clusters I mean, and high availability if you're running dual controller or dual NAS high availability settings, where you need to make sure your VM can withstand loss of one of those controller systems or power. But bear in mind, some of these options are behind the Pro version of Windows Virtual Machine Manager, which requires an additional license payment, all available there. As you can see, I've got the basic built in, as well as virtual DSMs. You can create one virtual DSM if you choose, but you have to buy additional licenses for more. And that's really it. For the Synology side, you've got the general overview, but it has to be said that on this occasion, Synology have gone a little bit more detailed and veered slightly away from their usual, very, very user-friendly, if a fraction limited interface, to something a little bit more comfortably in the middle, I think. Now, on the QNAP side of things, we can take a look. Right now, we can see the utilization in the overview of CPU and memory utilization of that VM in real time. Again, we have got the options of configuration. If we have a look here at the bottom, we can select the settings here of this individual VM, and that can be broken down into individual VMs throughout the whole system if we choose. On the side, we can see information with regards to the VM image, network configuration options, virtual hard disk options, if we attach a USB CD DVD drive, or if we create a virtual CD DVD Blu-ray ROM drive, which can then load virtual VM disks and virtual ISOs, it's all available there. You can assign USB ports on the system to the VM and therefore connect devices to a physical USB on the NAS and make them virtually accessible on the VM. That is an option available on the Synology, but not to the same diverse range of devices that QNAP provide. And again, you can create snapshots very, very quickly on the fly and duplicate them and share them if you choose. Share access to the VM as well if you choose. And that sharing can be done quite easily, just like sharing most files on the NAS. Very, very straightforward. Now, going back into the overview there, one thing I do want to touch on, and I already sort of touched on this already, one lovely thing that QNAP include that Synology don't, which always surprises me, is the fact that you can't, on the QNAP, you can download those VMs. It allows you to directly download a virtual machine, so it downloads in the background and deploys, so you don't need to do all the mucking around and changing the settings, although you can change them afterwards if you choose, such as number of CPU cores and memory, but you just download the VM and it deploys. It's as straightforward as that. You can, again, import and export VMs, so you can create a virtual machine sandbox environment here that you just upload your ISO and allow it connect to if you've got it on your system. So in my case, if I can go into the right settings, if I remember where I put them, I believe in Homes, we can go into here and we can see all of those images there that we can mount as ISOs, just like you would a physical PC build, where you'd say the number of cores, memory, have the ISO and have it boot from disk. Or alternatively, you can import an existing VM, just like we saw earlier, with a backup image of a VM, be it in VM, VMDK or VMK, although some conversion may be necessary. Luckily, they include an image converter as well. Very well equipped tool. And that extends to the VM marketplace as well, that allows you to create virtual QuTS, just like Synology's DSM deployment, and connection with VM and blob level storage with AWS, pfSense and Zabbix, something I am hoping to look into for a follow-up video. And again, the options just seem a little bit more varied on the QNAP there, and again, that is something you would expect, although on this occasion the UI just seems better. And I have discussed in the past about comparing Virtualization Station and Synology Virtual Machine Manager, and generally always leaned towards the QNAP VM tool. It's been around longer and they've spent more time perfecting it. Now, You can shut down these VMs in a more natural fashion, as you would expect, by using the shutdown options here, or if you're in a rush, and I don't recommend doing this, but I'm just showing you that you can force the shutdown or trigger a remote shutdown. If we go for a forced shutdown, we can do the same here on the Synology. So we go here, we'll select this VM, go for the action, we'll force shutdown there as well, and this will shut down these two respective VMs. As you can see, we've lost connection to each of the VMs, they are long gone. And we can create and boot them if we choose with simple options. But from here it allows us to configure and now change a number of these settings if we choose. So if we go into both of them, we can now alter the CPU values, we can clone them, we can share them, we can do all of those different things. Now remember, you can export and import these VMs to other systems too. So you can remove these as an image, just like I've done, and deploy them on other NASs if you choose. We can change the number of cores, as you can see. We can change the amount of memory if you have it available, the storage location. We can do all of these things very, very quickly, as well as assigning ISOs and other disks in a virtual ISO or image fashion very, very easily. And we can create that virtual USB controller, just like on the QNAP mentioned earlier. But again, I've tested a lot of devices and seen more success generally on the QNAP. Now, on the QNAP side of things, the options just seem more diverse. Not only because you can actually assign CPU pass-through and CPU identity in a way that you can't on the Synology, but on top of that, you can assign graphics cards, which is a big, big deal for a number of people. The idea that you can go into a lot of the connected devices and assign a graphics card as a virtual machine graphics card, if you have a PCIe equipped NAS, which I don't here, is beneficial for those that want to use a VM for more graphically assisted demanding tasks. The virtual machine switch and network switch on both devices is an option, but it has to be said that network configurations, and we have touched on this in another video, are just that little bit better on the QNAP because they've spent more time configuring these settings to create virtual switches on the fly and a nicer topography as well, showing all of those connections on their device. If we go into the network settings of the Synology, it just seems a little more mainstream there and a little bit over the top in terms of information. Yes, you shouldn't be playing with network settings if you're not tech minded, but I would at least I'd like to have the ability to configure these things even as a novice and it be presented in a nice user-friendly fashion. And again, creating those virtual switches, you can create them just as easy on, well, I say just as easy, just as capably on both devices, but I will say virtual machine configuration creation is a lot more intuitive and friendly on the QNAP, and that does extend to the virtual machine tools. Ultimately, I do think the configuration of the client tool on the QNAP in QUTS Hero and indeed QTS is better than that of DSM, but again, it is still more to a more technical minded individual and something I think that a number of the advantages might wash over the head of a lot of other users. Now, virtual machine utilization on a NAS comes in many, many forms. Not only if you want to deploy them locally using the client applications, but you may have third-party tools such as VMware or utilizing the likes of Hyper-V to export or synchronize third-party VMs as well. Now, both systems have multi-tiered backup solution options with active backup and hyper backup on their respective platforms. But what I will add is active backup on the Synology is truly enterprise-grade level VM synchronization. On the QNAP, you have a tool known as Hypervisor, which, although pretty impressive, I would still argue isn't quite, or Hyperdata Protector isn't quite up there with the Active Backup suite, which migrates a lot of virtual machine and physical PC synchronization and backup into a single usable interface, and that includes cloud as well. And having the ability to synchronize and backup and duplicate and restore clouds in line with physical PCs in your environment is still pretty impressive. And I have done a full overview of this program. And again, you do need to activate it with a Synology active account. And that's utilizing your own Synology account that you can set up to remote access your NAS, which I'll save for another video as a walkthrough. But it is still a much better tool, and I've done a huge overview of that, and I do recommend you check that out. But outside of that tool, everything else afterwards, you can hear the fans on my laptop starting to ramp up, swings back towards the QNAP. They have hybrid, we're going to leave hybrid mount for this video, I think. They have hybrid backup sync 3, which again covers a lot of your multi-tier backup options, but it's a little bit more user-friendly, and a lot of these backups on more of a file folder and blob storage level than they are bespokely created for VM. What you need for VM backups, though, is the likes of client backup tools with QSync installed on the client devices, but I think it's better integrated on the Synology on that level. But what the QNAP arrives with instead is firstly their own first-party container tool, with Synology relying on a third-party tool known as Docker, which is still huge in the industry, with access to registries of applications that you can search through. But although both of them have that option, it has to be said, I think the container application is better on the QNAP. It's more diverse, it has a lot more variety and configuration options. Docker is still a leading industry tool, and I can see why Synology would absorb this as a container management tool in their UI. But I think QNAP have used a lot of what they've learnt in their virtual machine tool and integrated that UI very, very successfully, I find, into that of Container Station. Now, another difference between the two platforms is to do with Ubuntu. With the QNAP and QuTS Hero and QTS, not only can you download those Windows VMs and those virtual machine marketplace VMs, you can also download the latest Ubuntu Linux virtual machines. And again, just like those other VMs, a simple click here will allow you to download, install, and deploy this VM. The only limitation is your download speed. If you've got a good internet connection, you can have this VM up and running in minutes. You will have a Linux VM running from your NAS. So you can have a Linux VM, you can have a Windows VM, you can have AWS or some of the router management VMs. You've got all of those running at within 2 to 3 clicks on your system, all inclusive, and things that you're going to need images for elsewhere on the Synology. And it's another example of QNAP trying to support lots of different kinds of users in a more fluid way, and Synology trying to provide the best possible performance and most intuitive GUI kind of clashing. The result is the QNAP can do 10 to 20 things in this field with virtual machines very well. The Synology does 4 to 5 things exceptionally well, and it's that question of QNAP trying to cover as many bases as possible, and you know, one couldn't argue half-assing, but I will say doing a solid 6 or 7 out of 10 at 10 or 20 things, whereas the Synology doing 9 out of 10 on those core things that they focus on. And that, I think, is a big difference between them. And when it comes to virtual machine deployment, it's about what are the tools you're using? Are you using third-party tools? If so, you might find with third-party tools the Synology is the better platform. But if you're going to use a combination of first and third-party tools, the QNAP brings a lot more to the table than the Synology. And I think that's the main distinction between them. Synology for the third-party support, and QNAP for a balanced first and third party support in virtual machine management. And I can't wait to talk to you guys about QU1 at a later date, and of course in DSM7, where a lot of their first party tools have had even more improvements along the way. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Do click like and subscribe if you did, and of course visit the links in the description to learn more about these NASes. Otherwise, I will see you next time.